I'd like to share with you something about the life of David. It's in the early part of his life before he became king of Israel. It's recorded for us in the 24th chapter of 1 Samuel, in those first 10 verses. And that particular portion of scripture is a time when Saul, King Saul, was in pursuit of David. He was in hot pursuit of David. He had 3,000 chosen men of Israel, and they were trying to catch and capture and kill David. David was running with a few of his men to flee from Saul, and this is where the story picks up, because David and his men are fleeing, and Saul is coming toward them, and they flee and hide in a cave. It's one of the large caves they have in Israel where you could take an entire flock of sheep and put them in the cave, and you could get them out of the hot sun. They could rest and be protected in a cave. So the very, very large caves go way back deep into the ground. David and his men were back in the recesses of this cave, and of all things, the army of Saul with his 3,000 men pursuing David, looking for David, come up outside the cave, and Saul goes into the cave, not to seek David, but to rest. And when he comes into the cave, his army's outside, so he's perfectly protected, and he's inside the cave by himself alone. And here's what happened. David and his men saw Saul come in. And here's what the men said to David. The men said, "Here is the day the Lord has said to you," and they quote from the Lord, "Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as you seem good." And then the Bible describes to us how David sneaked up to Saul while Saul was in the cave and cut off the hem of his robe. Be kind of like someone cutting off the cuff of your pants, just cutting off a little piece of fabric. And that's what David did. Then David went back into the cave. His men told David, "This is your chance. God says he's going to deliver your enemy into your hand. You can take him out right now. No one will know the difference. Those men outside the cave will follow you because you've been their hero over the years. You've killed the giants. You've led them in victory over the Philistines." But David said, "No, no, no, I will not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed." And then, as you know the story, that Saul goes out of the cave, his men, and they march off into a distance. And then afterward, David rose and went out of the cave, and I read from Scripture, he called unto Saul, and he said, "My Lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, "Why do you pursue me? Behold, this day you've seen how I could take you out. I could have killed you, but I did not do it." And he says, "Look at the hem of your robe." And Saul found out right at that moment that David had been that close to him that he could have taken his life when he was in the cave, but did not do it. Now, that story you pretty well know, but I want to point out one thing about that story, which I think is very, very special. And that's something I skipped over when I read the first part of the scripture. I skipped it intentionally. Now I want to go back to it. It says, David arose and he crawled up and came close to Saul, cut off the robe. And then it says this in verse 5. He says, "And afterward David's heart struck him, because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. And he said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing against my Lord, the Lord's anointed, and put out my hand against him, seeing that he is the Lord's anointed." Now, I want you to get this picture, and it's a very important truth we must learn. David embarrassed his king, the Lord's anointed, before his men. He cut off his robe. He then hollered back to him and said, "I could have taken your life." The king was embarrassed. The king was humbled. The king then left David and said, "You're a better man than I am." And David and Saul and his men went off, and David stayed. But here's the point. David was stricken in his heart. Now remember, this is a man after God's own heart. He was stricken in his heart because he humiliated the Lord's anointed. Now in all of life, every authority structure we have in life was established by God. In fact, everything God ordained is simply an authority structure. He ordained the home. What about the home? Your father, children obey your parents. You have the church. We are to make the church's leaders work easy for them and submit to them. What about business? It talks about master-servant relationships. You have respect for your master for the Lord's sake. How about government? We are to honor the government because the government is set there by God. Every authority structure in your life or in my life has been put there by God, and he's in absolute control of it. He can change it anytime he wants, and he is the only one that can change it. Now, David understood this. David knew he was destined for the throne, but David knew his time had not yet come. And David, after he took advantage of his king, you know what? He was stricken in his heart. His heart was so tender toward God that it grieved him. You know, he had sorrow in his heart because why? He'd humiliated his leader. I think that's a lesson for all of us, because in life, we all have leaders, and sometimes we are leaders in different roles in our lives. We must show respect for those in authority over, whether it's respect for your parents, respect for your boss, respect for your pastor, respect for your government. Listen, God brings leaders into our life. They may even be like Saul, who pursues our life, but David showed respect for a leader that was pursuing his life. We can learn a great deal from the life of David. Remember, he was a man after God's own heart. When his life was over, twice God said of him, that man right there, David, is a man after my own heart. His heart was so tender that he was grieved over taking advantage of the Lord's anointed. May that be a lesson for all of us today.